When the truth goes live, nobody runs.
I knew something was wrong when my wife complimented my socks. No one likes my socks. They're gray, threadbare, and have a hole near the left big toe that I've been ignoring for 3 months. But there was Tessa standing in our kitchen on a Tuesday morning, coffee mug in hand, telling me how distinguished they looked. Distinguished socks, I repeated, pulling on my jacket. That's a new one, even for you. Tessa smiled that practiced smile she'd perfected during her years as a hospital administrator, warm enough to seem genuine, cold enough to keep people at arm's length. I'm just saying you look nice today, Nick. Is that a crime? In this house, probably. I grabbed my laptop bag and headed for the door. Don't forget Anna has soccer practice at 6, and Milo needs his permission slip signed for the field trip. Of course, she said, but I could tell she wasn't really listening. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and her eyes darted toward it like a moth to flame. I paused at the door. Everything okay at work? Fine, she said quickly. Too quickly. Just busy season. You know how it is. I did know how it was. I'd been married to Tessa Harlan for 14 years, and I could read her tells like a poker player reads cards. The way she tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. The way she over-enunciated words when she was lying. The way she suddenly became interested in my appearance when she was feeling guilty about something. But I was Nick Harlan, IT security analyst, father of 2, owner of Distinguished Socks, and apparently the last person in Denver to figure out what everyone else already knew. The revelation came 3 hours later, courtesy of my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who had the timing of a Swiss watch and the subtlety of a freight train. Nick, she called from her front porch as I pulled into my driveway after work. Everything okay with you and Tessa? I killed the engine and walked over to the fence that separated our properties. Mrs. Chen was 73, retired, and had made neighborhood surveillance her full-time job since her husband passed 2 years ago. Everything's fine, Mrs. Chen. Why do you ask? She glanced around conspiratorially, then leaned closer. Well, I don't like to gossip, but I saw Tessa's car at Sean Porter's place again last night. 3rd time this week. I just wanted to make sure everything was all right between you two. Sean Porter. The name hit me like a slap. Sean Porter, with his lifted truck and his gym membership and his habit of calling everyone buddy while looking like he wanted to arm wrestle them into submission. Sean Porter, who worked at the same hospital as Tessa and had been coming to our barbecues for the past 2 years, drinking my beer and complimenting my grilling while apparently planning to sleep with my wife. I'm sure it's just work stuff, I told Mrs. Chen, but the words tasted like sawdust in my mouth. Of course, dear. I'm sure that's all it is. But we both knew it wasn't. That evening, I sat in my home office, staring at my computer screen and pretending to work while my mind raced. Downstairs, I could hear Tessa helping the kids with homework, her voice bright and cheerful, the perfect suburban mother. Anna, 12 years old and wise beyond her years, was explaining fractions to 9-year-old Milo, who had inherited my analytical mind and his mother's stubborn streak. My phone buzzed. A text from my best friend Raj. Drinks tomorrow? I have news. Raj Patel had been my roommate in college, my best man at my wedding, and the closest thing I had to a brother. He was also a private investigator who specialized in corporate fraud, which meant he had a healthy skepticism about human nature and access to databases that most people didn't know existed. I texted back, can't wait, but I could wait. In fact, I was pretty sure I didn't want to hear whatever news Raj had to share. The next evening found us at Murphy's Pub, a dive bar downtown that served decent burgers and minded its own business. Raj was already 3 beers in when I arrived, which was never a good sign. You look like hell, he said by way of greeting. Thanks, you said you had news? Raj studied my face for a long moment, then sighed. How long have we been friends, Nick? 20 years, just tell me. I've been doing some freelance work for a divorce attorney downtown. Background checks, asset searches, that kind of thing. Yesterday, I was running surveillance on a cheating spouse case when I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. My stomach dropped. Tessa and Sean Porter, coming out of the Marriott downtown Tuesday afternoon. They weren't discussing hospital business, if you know what I mean. I drained my beer in one long gulp. How long? I don't know, but Nick, there's more. Of course there was more. There was always more. I did some digging. Porter's got a reputation. 3 previous affairs that I could document, all with married women, all ending badly. And your mother-in-law has been asking around about your financial situation. Greta. Tessa's mother, 61 years old, and convinced that she was descended from royalty despite growing up in a double-wide trailer in Kansas. Greta, who had spent the last 14 years making it clear that her daughter had married beneath her station. Greta, who talked about family legacy, like she was planning to establish a dynasty instead of managing a struggling antique shop. What kind of questions? Life insurance policies, retirement accounts, property values, the kind of questions someone asks when they're planning for a big change. I ordered another beer and tried to process this information. My wife was cheating on me with a serial adulterer. My mother-in-law was conducting financial reconnaissance. And I was sitting in a dive bar trying to figure out how my life had become a country music song. There's one more thing, Raj said quietly. Greta's been to see a lawyer. Family law specialist, big tools. Divorce? Looks like it. And Nick? They're not planning to play fair. I spent the drive home thinking about the last 14 years. Meeting Tessa at a hospital charity event where she was organizing volunteers and I was fixing their computer system. Our first date at an Italian restaurant where she laughed at my jokes and didn't seem to mind that I ordered the cheapest wine on the menu. The wedding, where Greta spent the entire reception telling anyone who would listen that her daughter was settling, but that love would conquer all. The birth of Anna, perfect and screaming and absolutely terrifying. Milo 3 years later, quiet and thoughtful even as a baby. Family vacations to the mountains, birthday parties in our backyard, Christmas mornings that felt like something out of a magazine. When had it all started to fall apart? When had Tessa stopped laughing at my jokes and started looking at her phone during dinner? When had Greta's disapproval shifted from passive-aggressive comments to active sabotage? I pulled into my driveway and sat in the car for a moment, looking at my house. It was a good house. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a decent yard where the kids could play. I'd painted it myself last summer, spending weekends on a ladder, while Tessa complained about the color, and Greta made suggestions about more sophisticated choices. Inside, the house was quiet. Tessa was already in bed, or pretending to be. I checked on the kids, Anna reading under her covers with a flashlight, Milo fast asleep with his stuffed dinosaur. Normal kids living a normal life, unaware that their world was about to implode. I went to my office and opened my laptop. If Raj was right, if Tessa and Greta were planning something, I needed to be ready. I started with the basics, bank accounts, credit cards, insurance policies. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. Then I found the letter. It was buried in a folder labeled medical records, which should have contained routine physicals and vaccination records. Instead, I found a letter from a fertility clinic dated 6 months ago. A letter addressed to Tessa, discussing genetic material transfer and mentioning a donor designation, Harold G. Harold Grimsby. Greta's late husband, Tessa's stepfather, who had died of a heart attack 2 years ago after a lifetime of cigars and bourbon. I read the letter 3 times before the implications sank in. Tessa was pregnant, had been pregnant, or was planning to become pregnant. And the father wasn't me. It was her dead stepfather. The call came at 3 a.m. on a Thursday in October. I was dreaming about spreadsheets and tax returns when the phone rang, jarring me awake with the particular urgency that only comes with middle-of-the-night emergencies. "Nick, it's time," Tessa said, her voice tight with pain and something else I couldn't identify. "The baby's coming." The baby. In all the chaos of discovering the affair and the fertility clinic letter, I'd almost forgotten about the pregnancy Tessa had announced 2 months ago. The pregnancy she'd claimed was a surprise and a blessing, delivered with that same practiced smile she used when talking to difficult patients at the hospital. I drove through empty streets while Tessa breathed through contractions in the passenger seat. She'd called Sean first. I'd seen his name on her recent calls list. But apparently even he wasn't willing to play daddy in the delivery room. "Everything's going to be fine," I said, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince. "You don't understand," Tessa whispered. "You don't understand what we've done. We, not I. We." The delivery was routine until it wasn't. Dr. Martinez, who had delivered both Anna and Milo, emerged from the birthing room with the expression of someone who just witnessed a car accident. He pulled me aside while Tessa held the baby, her face a mask of horror and regret. "Mr. Harlan, I need to prepare you for some complications," Dr. Martinez said quietly. "The baby has some unusual characteristics, genetic abnormalities that suggest advanced paternal age, much more advanced than your current age would indicate." I looked through the window at my wife holding a baby that looked like it had been born in 1924. The child had Harold Grimsby's distinctive jaw, his large joints, the same jaundiced complexion that had marked Harold's final years. Even the baby's cries sounded like Harold's smoker's cough. "There will be ongoing medical issues," Dr. Martinez continued. "Joint problems, respiratory complications, possible developmental delays. I have to ask, is there any family history we should know about? Any genetic factors that might explain these presentations?" I could have told him the truth. I could have explained that my wife and her mother had decided to play God with a dead man's genetic material, creating a child who was simultaneously my son and my wife's half-brother. I could have mentioned that this baby was the product of the most disturbing family planning decision in the history of suburban Denver. Instead, I said, "I'll need to discuss this with my wife." But Tessa was already talking, the words spilling out between sobs. "We used Harold's seed. My mother convinced me it would be good for the family legacy. She said it would bring us luck, having Harold's genes in the next generation." She said, "Jesus Christ, Tessa." The words came out louder than I intended, causing a nurse to look up from her charts. "You used your stepfather's seed? Your dead stepfather's seed?" She said it would make the baby special. She said Harold always wanted a son, and this way you could have a child with your stepfather while married to me. This way you could create a baby who's going to need medical care for the rest of his life because his genetic parents were related. This way you could make me complicit in the most screwed up family planning decision since the Borgias. The baby chose that moment to open his eyes, Harold's pale blue eyes in a newborn's face, and looked directly at me. I swear he had Harold's expression of vague disappointment, the same look Harold had given me every Christmas when I'd failed to provide sufficiently expensive gifts. "I need some air," I said, and walked out of the hospital into the October night. I called Raj from the parking lot. "It's 4 in the morning," he answered. "This better be good. Tessa just gave birth to her stepfather." There was a long pause. "I'm going to need you to run that by me again." I explained the fertility clinic letter, the baby's appearance, Tessa's tearful confession. When I finished, Raj was quiet for so long I thought the call had dropped. "Raj, I'm here. I'm just trying to process the fact that your mother-in-law convinced your wife to artificially inseminate herself with her dead husband's seed." "That's the situation." Yes. "And now you have a baby who's technically your wife's half-brother." "Also, yes." "Nick, I've been a private investigator for 15 years. I've seen people do terrible things for money, for revenge, for love, for pills, but this is a new level of screwed up. Tell me something I don't know." "Okay, here's something you don't know. This gives you leverage, massive leverage, because what your wife and mother-in-law did isn't just morally questionable, it's potentially illegal. Fraud, misrepresentation, possibly even misuse depending on how you want to play it." I looked back at the hospital where my wife was presumably bonding with her half-brother's son, while nurses pretended not to notice that the baby looked like he'd been born during the Coolidge administration. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking it's time to introduce your family to the concept of consequences." The next morning, I started making phone calls, not to lawyers or investigators, but to the most powerful force in suburban Denver, the gossip network. It started with Mrs. Chen, who was watering her plants when I got home from the hospital. "How's the new baby?" she asked brightly. "Healthy," I said, then paused, as if something had just occurred to me. "You know, it's the strangest thing. He looks exactly like Harold. Tessa's stepfather. I mean, exactly like him. Same jaw, same eye, even the same expression. It's almost like Harold came back from the dead." Mrs. Chen's watering can stopped moving. "Really? I've never seen anything like it." The nurses were commenting on it too. One of them said she'd never seen such a strong family resemblance in a newborn. It's like Harold's genes just completely dominated everything else. I could practically see the gears turning in Mrs. Chen's head. By noon, she'd called her sister, her book club, and the president of the neighborhood association. By evening, the story had reached Greta's social circle at the country club. The second call went to Monica Walsh, Tessa's best friend and the biggest gossip in the hospital administration department. Monica, it's Nick. I wanted to let you know Tessa had the baby. Oh, wonderful. How is she? She's emotional, really emotional. She keeps talking about family legacy and how the baby's going to carry on Harold's bloodline. She's almost obsessive about it. The doctors are a little concerned about her mental state, to be honest. Her mental state? She keeps saying things like, Harold would be so proud and now Harold's genes will live on. I mean, I understand being sentimental about her stepfather, but this seems excessive. She's talking about the baby like he's Harold reincarnated or something. Monica was quiet for a moment. That does sound unusual. I'm probably overreacting. It's just that the baby really does look like Harold. Unnaturally like Harold. And with Tessa's comments about bloodlines and legacy, I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into it. By the end of the week, the story had evolved and spread through Denver's suburban network like wildfire. Tessa Harlan had given birth to a baby who looked exactly like her dead stepfather. She was making strange comments about family legacy and bloodlines. The baby had unusual medical issues consistent with advanced paternal age. The timeline was suspicious. The resemblance was uncanny. Nobody was saying it directly, but everyone was thinking it. Something wasn't right with the Harlan family. Greta called me on Saturday morning, her voice shaking with rage. What have you been telling people about Harold and the baby? Just the truth, Greta, that he looks like Harold, that Tessa's emotional about the family resemblance. Why? Is there something else I should be telling people? You know damn well what you're doing, Nick Harlan. You're trying to destroy this family's reputation. I'm not trying to destroy anything. I'm just commenting on the remarkable genetic resemblance between my newborn son and your dead husband. Unless there's some reason I shouldn't be talking about that? The silence stretched long enough for me to imagine Greta's face turning purple with fury. This isn't over, she finally said. No, I agreed. I don't think it is. The beauty of suburban gossip is its efficiency. Within 2 weeks of baby Harold Jr.'s birth, yes, Tessa had actually named him Harold, the story had reached every corner of Denver's middle-class social network. PTA meetings, soccer games, book clubs, charity events, grocery store checkout lines, everywhere people gathered, they whispered about the Harlan family's unusual situation. I helped it along, of course. A comment here, a concerned observation there, always delivered with the perfect mix of confusion and worry that made people lean in closer. I just don't understand genetics, I guess, I told Rebecca Martinez at Anna's soccer game. I mean, how does a baby end up looking exactly like his grandfather? The doctors seem really puzzled by it. His grandfather? Rebecca's eyebrows shot up. Tessa's stepfather, Harold. He passed away 2 years ago, but honestly, it's like he's been reborn. Same facial features, same bone structure, even the same health issues Harold had in his later years. The pediatrician says he's never seen anything like it. Rebecca glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then leaned closer. What kind of health issues? Joint problems, respiratory complications. Things you'd expect in an elderly man, not a newborn. It's almost like the baby inherited Harold's age along with his appearance. By the time Anna scored her second goal of the game, Rebecca was already texting her sister-in-law, who worked in the same hospital as Tessa. The next target was Greta's precious social standing. She'd spent years cultivating relationships with Denver's wannabe elite, positioning herself as a woman of taste and refinement, despite her trailer park origins. She volunteered at the art museum, organized charity galas, and name-dropped her way through every social event in the city. I hit her where it hurt most, the annual Children's Hospital fundraiser, where Greta had been serving on the planning committee for 5 years. I arrived early, wearing my best suit and carrying a folder full of baby photos. When committee members asked about the new addition to the family, I was ready. He's healthy, thank God, I said, showing pictures of little Harold with his unnaturally aged features. Though the doctors are fascinated by his genetics, they keep asking about family history, trying to understand how he ended up with such distinctive characteristics. He has very mature features for a newborn, observed Patricia Whitman, the committee chairwoman. That's what everyone says. He looks exactly like Tessa's stepfather. Exactly. The resemblance is so strong that people at the hospital have been commenting on it. Some of them knew Harold before he passed, and they say it's like looking at him as a baby. I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Greta's been saying it's a miracle. She keeps talking about how Harold's legacy lives on, how his bloodline will continue through little Harold. She's very emotional about it. Patricia's expression shifted from polite interest to uncomfortable curiosity. His bloodline? I think she means the family resemblance. Though between you and me, she's been acting strange since the birth, very focused on the idea that Harold's genes are somehow special. She talks about the baby like he's Harold reincarnated. Within an hour, Patricia had shared this conversation with 3 other committee members. By the end of the fundraiser, Greta found herself excluded from conversations, receiving polite but distant smiles, and fielding uncomfortable questions about her miraculous grandson. But the real masterpiece came during the hospital's annual Halloween party. Tessa had returned to work part-time, bringing baby Harold to the office daycare, where her colleagues could see him up close. I arranged to pick up Tessa after work, timing my arrival to coincide with the shift change when the most people would be around. I walked through the administrative offices carrying a baby who looked like he belonged in a sepia-toned photograph from 1920. Nick! Monica Walsh appeared at my elbow, her voice artificially bright. How's fatherhood treating you? It's an adventure, I said, adjusting Harold's blanket so his distinctive features were clearly visible. Though, I have to admit, having a son who looks like his grandfather is unusual. Grandfather? Harold, Tessa's stepfather. The resemblance is uncanny. Sometimes I feel like I'm holding Harold himself. Monica's smile flickered. That's sweet. Tessa thinks so. She keeps saying how proud Harold would be, how his legacy continues through little Harold. Sometimes she talks to the baby like he's actually Harold. Yesterday I heard her telling him about people from Harold's past, people the baby couldn't possibly know about. I bounced the baby gently, making sure his pale blue eyes, Harold's eyes, were visible to everyone watching. The pediatrician says the genetic expression is remarkable. He's never seen such dominant traits from a grandparent. Usually, you get a mix of features from both sides of the family, but little Harold here is pure Grimsby. Pure Grimsby? That was Harold's last name before Greta remarried. She was a Grimsby for 20 years. Sometimes I think she misses those days. By now, several other staff members had gathered around, drawn by the conversation and the opportunity to see the baby everyone had been talking about. I could feel their eyes moving between Harold's aged features and my carefully neutral expression. He has such distinctive characteristics, offered Sarah from accounting. Harold always did. Big hands, strong jaw, those pale eyes. Tessa says the baby even sleeps like Harold did, on his back with his hands folded over his chest. She jokes that he's got Harold's soul. The group fell silent. In the fluorescent lighting of the hospital corridor, baby Harold looked even more unnaturally aged, his features sharp and defined, in a way that newborns' features never were. Well, Monica said finally, genetics are fascinating. They certainly are, I agreed, though sometimes I wonder if there's more to it than just genetics. I left that comment hanging in the air as I walked away, baby Harold in my arms, a dozen hospital employees staring after us with expressions of growing suspicion and dawning horror. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place 3 days later when Anna came home from school with tears in her eyes. Dad, kids are saying weird things about baby Harold. I sat down next to her on the couch, putting my arm around her shoulders. What kind of weird things? They're saying he's not really your baby. They're saying Mom did something bad to have him. They're saying Grandma Greta is crazy. Anna was 12, old enough to understand that adult relationships were complicated, but young enough to be genuinely hurt by playground gossip. I felt a moment of guilt for the pain I was causing her, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger at Tessa and Greta for putting us in this situation in the first place. What do you think, Anna? You've seen baby Harold. What do you see when you look at him? She was quiet for a long moment, her head resting against my shoulder. He looks like great-grandpa Harold, exactly like him. And Mom acts weird around him, like she's scared of him or something. And Grandma Greta keeps saying creepy things about family, legacy, and bloodlines. What kind of creepy things? She told me that Harold's spirit lives on in the baby. She said that some people are chosen to carry on important genetic lines. She said that sometimes love finds a way to transcend passing. I closed my eyes. Even Greta's conversations with my 12-year-old daughter were inappropriate. Dad, did Mom do something bad? I could have lied. I could have told Anna that everything was fine, that people were just gossiping, that families sometimes have unusual genetic expressions. I could have protected her innocence for a little while longer. Instead, I told her the truth. Yes, Anna, Mom and Grandma Greta made some very bad decisions, and now our family is going to change. She nodded against my shoulder, and I realized that she'd already figured out most of it on her own. Anna had always been perceptive, but living in a house with Tessa's lies and Greta's manipulation had sharpened her instincts for detecting adult deception. Are you going to divorce, Mom? I think so. Good, she said quietly. She's been lying to us for a long time. That evening, after Anna and Milo were in bed, I confronted Tessa in our kitchen. She was preparing bottles for Harold, her movements mechanical and joyless. We need to talk, I said. I know what you've been doing, she replied without looking up. The gossip, the comments, the way you've been showing off the baby like he's some kind of freak show attraction. I've been telling the truth, that's all. You've been destroying my reputation, our family's reputation. Our family's reputation was destroyed the moment you decided to have a baby with your dead stepfather. She whirled around, her face flushed with anger. It wasn't like that. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Mom kept saying that Harold's genes were special, that our family needed his legacy to continue. She said it would bring us luck, that Harold would watch over us. So you thought artificial insemination with a dead relative was a reasonable response to family pressure? I thought it would make her happy. I thought it would give us a child with strong genes, good genes. I didn't know he would look so much like Harold. I didn't know people would figure it out. Figure what out, Tessa? That you committed fraud? That you lied to me about the paternity of your child? That you and your mother engaged in what's essentially a form of incest? It's not incest. Harold wasn't my biological father. He was your stepfather for 20 years. He raised you, and now you've had his baby. Harold Jr. started crying in his bassinet, his wails sounding eerily like his genetic father's death rattle. Tessa picked him up, and I watched her face crumple as she looked at the child who would forever remind her of her terrible decision. I want a divorce, I said quietly. You can't. I won't let you. You don't have a choice. And Tessa, I'm going to fight for custody of Anna and Milo, full custody. You'll never get it. I'm their mother. You're also a woman who artificially inseminated herself with her stepfather's seed while married to another man. I don't think family court is going to look favorably on your judgment. She stared at me across the kitchen, holding her half-brother son, and I saw the moment she realized that her world was about to collapse completely. This isn't over, Nick. No, I said. It's just beginning. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and broken dreams. I sat at a polished wooden table next to my attorney, Janet Morrison, watching Tessa and Greta whisper frantically with their legal representation across the aisle. Baby Harold was mercifully absent, probably in the care of some unfortunate babysitter, who was getting paid overtime to deal with a child who looked like he belonged in a daguerreotype. Janet Morrison was Raj's recommendation, a family law specialist with a reputation for aggressive tactics and an impressive win rate in custody battles. She was 50-something, sharp-eyed, and had the kind of smile that suggested she enjoyed her work a little too much. Remember, she whispered as Judge Patricia Hendricks entered the courtroom, we're not here to destroy your wife's character. We're here to demonstrate that her judgment is fundamentally compromised, and that the children's best interests lie with you. What's the difference? About $50,000 in legal fees. Judge Hendricks was a stern-looking woman in her 60s who had been presiding over family court for 20 years. She'd seen every kind of domestic drama, from simple infidelity to complex financial fraud, but I was pretty sure she'd never encountered a case quite like ours. This is a petition for divorce filed by Nicholas Harlan against Teresa Harlan, with concurrent motions for child custody, spousal support, and property division, she announced. Mr. Morrison, you may proceed. Janet stood and smoothed her skirt. Your Honor, my client is seeking dissolution of marriage based on irreconcilable differences, specifically his wife's pattern of deception, fraud, and behavior that demonstrates a fundamental lack of judgment regarding family welfare. Tessa's attorney, a nervous-looking man named David Keller, immediately objected. Your Honor, these are serious accusations without foundation. Mrs. Harlan is a devoted mother and a respected hospital administrator with no history of— Mr. Keller, Judge Hendricks interrupted. You'll have your chance to present your case. Please continue, Ms. Morrison. Thank you, Your Honor. The evidence will show that Ms. Harlan, in consultation with her mother, Greta Grimsby, engaged in reproductive fraud by using genetic material from her deceased stepfather to conceive a child while married to my client. without his knowledge or consent. A murmur ran through the courtroom gallery, where a handful of reporters and curious onlookers had gathered. Judge Hendricks raised her eyebrows, but maintained her professional composure. Furthermore, Janet continued, this decision was made not for medical reasons, but as part of a disturbing obsession with family legacy that demonstrates a profound lack of judgment and raises serious questions about Mrs. Harlan's fitness as a parent. Objection. Keller jumped to his feet. Counsel is making inflammatory statements without... Overruled. This is opening statements, Mr. Keller. You'll have your opportunity to respond. Janet nodded and continued. The evidence will show that Mrs. Harlan's actions have caused significant emotional distress to the family's older children, Anna and Milo Harlan, who have been subjected to public ridicule and psychological trauma as a result of their mother's choices. My client is seeking the full custody of these children, as well as appropriate financial support to ensure their continued well-being. She sat down, and I could feel Tessa's eyes boring into the side of my head. I didn't turn around. Keller's opening statement was a masterpiece of misdirection and sufferer blaming. He painted Tessa as a grieving daughter who had made an unconventional but understandable choice to honor her stepfather's memory. He suggested that I was a vindictive husband who couldn't accept his wife's emotional needs. He hinted that my public comments about the baby's appearance were evidence of my own psychological instability. Mrs. Harlan made a private medical decision in consultation with her mother and her physician, he argued. While this decision may seem unusual to some, it was made out of love and respect for a man who played a significant role in her life. Mr. Harlan's response has been to publicly humiliate his wife and expose his family to ridicule and gossip. It was a good strategy, I had to admit. Turn the sufferer into the aggressor, make the bizarre seem sympathetic, and hope the judge was feeling charitable. Then Janet called her first witness, Dr. Martinez, the obstetrician who had delivered Harold Jr. Doctor, can you describe the unusual characteristics you observed in the infant born to Mr. and Mrs. Harlan? Dr. Martinez looked uncomfortable but answered professionally. The child displayed physical characteristics consistent with advanced paternal age, enlarged joints, distinctive facial features, and certain health complications that are typically associated with genetic material from older donors. In your medical opinion, what would cause these characteristics in a newborn? The most likely explanation would be that the biological father was significantly older than the mother's husband, who was 39 years old. How much older? Based on the genetic expression I observed, I would estimate the biological father to be in his 60s or 70s. Janet let that sink in before continuing. Did Mrs. Harlan make any statements to you about the child's paternity? She indicated that genetic material from her deceased stepfather had been used in the conception. Her stepfather, not her husband. That's correct? And what was your professional reaction to this information? Dr. Martinez glanced at Tessa, then back at Janet. I was surprised. This is not a typical family planning decision. There are significant ethical and psychological considerations involved in using genetic material from a deceased family member, particularly without the knowledge of the spouse. Keller's cross-examination focused on medical privacy and the doctor's obligation to respect patient confidentiality, but the damage was done. Dr. Martinez had confirmed the basic facts. Tessa had used her stepfather's seed to conceive a child while married to me, and this was not normal medical practice. The second witness was Monica Walsh, Tessa's former best friend and hospital colleague. Janet had subpoenaed her, and Monica looked like she'd rather be anywhere else in the world. Ms. Walsh, how long have you known the defendant? About 8 years. We worked together at Denver General. Would you describe your relationship as close? We were close. We used to be close. Did Mrs. Harlan ever discuss her family planning decisions with you? Monica glanced at Tessa, who was staring at her with barely concealed fury. Sometimes. Did she ever mention using genetic material from her stepfather? Objection. Keller was on his feet. This calls for privileged communication between friends. Overruled. There's no legal privilege for friendship, Mr. Keller. Monica took a deep breath. She mentioned that her mother wanted her to have a baby that would carry on Harold's legacy. She said Greta had been pressuring her to find a way to preserve Harold's genetic line. Did she mention how she planned to do this? She said there were ways, medical ways. She said her mother had been researching options. What was your response to this information? I told her it sounded crazy. I told her she should focus on her marriage and her existing children. Did she take your advice? Monica's voice dropped to almost a whisper. Obviously not. The cross-examination was brutal. Keller painted Monica as a jealous friend who was betraying confidences out of spite. He suggested that her testimony was unreliable and motivated by personal animosity. By the time he was finished, Monica was in tears and Tessa was glaring at her with undisguised hatred. But the real fireworks came when Janet called Greta Grimsby to the stand. Greta had dressed for court like she was attending a charity gala. Expensive suit, perfect makeup, jewelry that probably cost more than my car. She walked to the witness stand with the bearing of someone who expected deference and got it. Mrs. Grimsby, what is your relationship to the defendant? Teresa is my daughter, my only child. And what was your relationship with Harold Grimsby? Harold was my husband for 22 years before his passing. Did you discuss family planning with your daughter following your husband's end? Greta's composure slipped slightly. We discussed many things. Family is important. Did you specifically discuss using your late husband's genetic material to conceive a grandchild? I may have mentioned that Harold always wanted a son, that his legacy deserved to continue. Mrs. Grimsby, did you encourage your daughter to use Harold's seed to conceive a child while she was married to my client? The courtroom was dead silent. Greta looked at Tessa, then at her attorney, then back at Janet. Her carefully constructed facade was cracking. I suggested that there were options, medical options, ways to honor Harold's memory. By having your daughter conceive a child with her stepfather's genetic material, Harold wasn't her biological father, but he was her stepfather. He raised her, and you encouraged her to have his baby. It wasn't like that. Greta's voice rose, and Judge Hendricks looked up sharply. Harold's genes were special. He came from good stock, good bloodlines. Teresa's children deserved to have that legacy. Even if it meant deceiving her husband, Nick Harlan was never good enough for my daughter. He's a nobody, a computer repairman with no family, no connections, no future. Harold's child would have breeding, would have class. The courtroom erupted. Keller was objecting, Judge Hendricks was calling for order, and Greta was still talking, her voice getting louder and more unhinged. Harold's bloodline goes back generations. His family built this state. That baby carries the genes of pioneers, of builders, of men who mattered. Not like some nobody from nowhere who fixes computers for a living. Mrs. Grimsby, Judge Hendricks banged her gavel. You will control yourself or be held in contempt. But Greta was beyond control. 20 years of suppressed resentment and social climbing desperation poured out in a torrent of venom. You want to know the truth? Yes. I encouraged Teresa to use Harold's seed. Yes. I thought it was better than having another child with that mediocre husband of hers. Harold's genes are superior. Harold's legacy deserves to continue. And if that means deceiving Nick Harlan, then so be it. The silence that followed was deafening. Greta sat in the witness chair, breathing hard, apparently just realizing what she'd said. Tessa had her face in her hands. Keller looked like he wanted to crawl under his table. Judge Hendricks stared at Greta for a long moment, then turned to Janet. Do you have any more questions for this witness? No, Your Honor. I think Mrs. Grimsby has been quite thorough. The rest of the trial was anticlimactic. Keller tried to rehabilitate his case by calling character witnesses for Tessa and presenting evidence of my vindictive behavior and spreading gossip about the family. But Greta's courtroom breakdown had destroyed any sympathy the judge might have had for their position. When Judge Hendricks delivered her ruling 3 days later, it was swift and decisive. This court finds that Mrs. Harlan's actions constitute a fundamental breach of marital trust and demonstrate a pattern of deception that is incompatible with the responsibilities of parenthood. The decision to conceive a child using genetic material from a deceased family member without the knowledge or consent of her spouse shows a profound lack of judgment that raises serious concerns about her fitness as a custodial parent. She awarded me full custody of Anna and Milo, with Tessa receiving supervised visitation rights. I got the house, the cars, and most of our assets. Tessa was left with baby Harold, a small monthly support payment, and the wreckage of her reputation. As we left the courthouse, I saw Greta standing on the steps looking lost and defeated. Her perfect makeup was smudged, her expensive suit wrinkled, her carefully constructed persona in ruins. This isn't over, Nick, she called out as I walked past with my attorney. Yes, it is, I replied. It's been over for a long time. You just didn't know it yet. Sean Porter's gym was called Iron Will Fitness, which I'd always thought was pretentious for a place that smelled like sweat and broken dreams. It was housed in a converted warehouse on the outskirts of downtown, complete with exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of aggressively motivational posters that made me want to eat a donut out of spite. Sean had been a regular there for 3 years, according to Raj's surveillance report. He went every morning at 6, every evening at 7, and sometimes during lunch breaks when he wanted to impress whatever married woman he was currently pursuing. He had his own locker, his own parking space, and his own collection of admirers who gathered around the weight bench to watch him lift things and put them down again. It was the perfect place for a public humiliation. Raj had spent 2 weeks documenting Sean's routine, his relationships with other gym members, and most importantly, his habit of bragging about his conquests in the locker room. The audio equipment was surprisingly easy to install. A few strategically placed devices that looked like standard gym equipment connected to the facility's sound system through their poorly secured wireless network. "You sure about this?" Raj asked as we sat in his car across the street, watching Sean's ridiculous lifted truck pull into the parking lot. "Once we do this, there's no going back." "He's been sleeping with my wife for months," I said. "He knew she was married, knew she had kids, and he did it anyway. Now he gets to face the consequences." "Fair enough. You ready?" I nodded and pulled out my phone. The app Raj had designed was beautifully simple. One button that would activate the audio system and broadcast our pre-recorded compilation of Sean's locker room conversations to every speaker in the gym. Sean disappeared through the front doors, probably heading straight for the bench press where he could show off for the morning crowd. I waited 5 minutes, then pressed the button. The first voice that came through the speakers was Sean's, recorded 3 days earlier while he was bragging to another gym member about his latest conquest. "Man, you should see this chick I'm screwing. Married, desperate, totally hot for me. She keeps telling me how her husband doesn't understand her, how I'm the best she's ever had. Classic stuff." The gym went quiet. Through the windows, I could see people stopping their workouts, looking around in confusion. The best part is, she's pregnant with some other dude's kid, but she's still sneaking around to see me. Talk about commitment issues, right? But hey, pregnant chicks are freaky in bed. Now people were starting to look uncomfortable. A few were heading for the front desk, probably to complain about the inappropriate audio. Her mother-in-law is in on it too. Crazy old bat keeps encouraging her daughter to leave her husband. Keeps talking about how the family deserves better. I'm like, "Lady, I'm just here for the Zex, not the family drama." Sean appeared in the front window, his face red with embarrassment and rage. He was gesturing frantically at the staff, who were scrambling to figure out how to shut off the sound system. The husband's a total loser. Computer nerd, no muscle tone, drives a Honda Civic. I mean, what kind of man drives a Honda Civic? No wonder his wife is looking elsewhere. The recording continued for another 3 minutes, featuring Sean's detailed descriptions of his affair with Tessa, his opinions on my inadequacies as a husband, and his plans to upgrade to a younger, unmarried woman once Tessa became too clingy. By the time the gym staff managed to shut down the audio system, half the members had walked out and the other half were staring at Sean like he was something they'd scraped off their shoes. "Phase 1 complete," Raj said, starting the car. "Ready for Phase 2? Phase 2 took place in the parking lot of Anna's school, where Sean had made the mistake of confronting me during pickup time. He'd been waiting by my car, his face still flushed from the gym incident, his hands clenched into fists that he apparently thought were intimidating. "You son of a witch," he said as I approached with Anna and Milo. "You think you're funny? You think this is some kind of game?" "Sean," I said calmly, "I'm picking up my children from school. This isn't really the time or place for whatever conversation you think we need to have. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. No, you humiliated yourself. I just made sure people heard about it." He stepped closer, trying to use his height and muscle mass to intimidate me. It might have worked 6 months ago, before I'd discovered that my wife was cheating on me with a serial adulterer, and my mother-in-law was encouraging her to have babies with dead relatives. "Dad," Anna said quietly, "who is this guy?" "This is Sean Porter, honey. He's the man who was sleeping with your mother while she was married to me." Anna looked Sean up and down with the kind of withering assessment that only 12-year-old girls can deliver. "He doesn't look like much." Sean's face turned purple. "You little..." "Careful," I interrupted. "You're about to threaten a child in front of a school full of witnesses. That won't end well for you." He looked around and seemed to notice for the first time that we were surrounded by other parents, teachers, and students, all of whom were watching our conversation with keen interest. Several people had their phones out, undoubtedly recording the whole thing. "This isn't over," he said, but his voice had lost its aggressive edge. "Actually, it is," I replied. "You see, Sean, you made a fundamental error in judgment. You thought you could sleep with my wife, help destroy my family, and walk away without consequences. But consequences have a way of catching up with people." I opened my car door and helped Anna and Milo into their seats. As I walked around to the driver's side, Sean grabbed my arm. "You can't just—" The slap was perfect. Not a punch, which would have been attack. Not a shove, which would have been battery. Just a sharp, open-handed slap across his face that echoed across the parking lot like a fire shot. Sean staggered backward, more from shock than pain, his hand going to his reddening cheek. The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, and I could hear murmurs of approval from some of the other parents. "That," I said clearly, "was for sleeping with my wife. This," I continued, pulling out my phone and taking a picture of his stunned expression, "is for being stupid enough to confront me in public." I got in my car and drove away, leaving Sean standing in the parking lot with his hand on his face and his reputation in ruins. The photo went viral within hours. Anna, who was apparently more social media savvy than I realized, had posted it to her Instagram with the caption, "When the homewrecker tries to intimidate my dad and gets slapped instead, karma, don't mess. With my family, loser." By evening, the image had been shared thousands of times, accompanied by the story of Sean's affair and his public humiliation at the gym. Someone had even created a meme using his shocked expression with the text, "When you realize actions have consequences." But the real masterpiece came 2 days later, during Sean's backyard barbecue. Raj had discovered that Sean was hosting a party for his coworkers and friends, probably trying to rehabilitate his image after the gym incident. It was the perfect opportunity for our grand finale. The banner was 20 feet long and professionally printed, "World's Best Homewrecker," in bright red letters, with smaller text underneath reading, "Sean Porter, specializing in married women and family destruction since 2018. We waited until the party was in full swing, then used a drone to unfurl the banner from the trees overlooking Sean's backyard. The timing was perfect. Just as Sean was giving a toast about friendship and loyalty, the banner dropped into view of all his guests. The reaction was immediate and spectacular. People started laughing, pointing, taking pictures. Sean's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that reminded me of raw hamburger. He tried to pull the banner down, but we'd secured it well. He tried to continue the party, but his guests were too busy taking selfies with the banner in the background. Within an hour, the backyard was empty except for Sean, a pile of abandoned beer bottles, and a banner that would probably stay up until his homeowners association forced him to take it down. The final blow came from an unexpected source. Lexi Morrison, one of Tessa's former friends and the biggest gossip in their social circle. She'd been quietly documenting the whole saga on social media, turning Sean's downfall into a cautionary tale about the dangers of sleeping with married women. Her Facebook post went viral overnight. "Ladies, let this be a lesson. If a man will cheat with you, he'll cheat on you." Sean Porter thought he was the hot stuff, sleeping with his married coworker while her husband was at home taking care of their kids. Now he's single, unemployed, yes, the hospital fired him, and famous for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, the husband he thought was such a loser just won full custody of his kids and rebuilt his life. Karma is real, and she has a sense of humor. The post was shared over 10,000 times, turning Sean Porter into a cautionary tale that would follow him for years. 3 weeks later, I ran into him at the grocery store. He was alone, looking tired and defeated, buying frozen dinners and cheap beer. He saw me coming and tried to avoid eye contact, but I walked right up to him. "Sean," I said pleasantly, "how are you doing?" He looked around nervously, probably checking for cameras or witnesses. "Fine. I'm fine. That's good to hear. I heard you lost your job." "I'll find something else. I'm sure you will. Though you might want to consider a career change. Maybe something that doesn't involve working closely with married women." He pushed his cart away without responding, but I could see his shoulders shaking with suppressed rage and humiliation. As I watched him disappear down the cereal aisle, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sean Porter had thought he could destroy my family without consequences. He'd thought he was smarter, stronger, more deserving than me. He'd been wrong on all counts. The storm hit Denver on a Tuesday night in November, the kind of early winter tempest that turns suburban streets into rivers and makes smart people stay indoors. I was in my home office, working late on a security audit for a downtown law firm, when the motion sensors I'd installed after the divorce started chiming. Someone was in my backyard. I pulled up the security camera feeds on my laptop and saw two figures moving through the darkness toward my back door. Even through the rain and poor visibility, I recognized them immediately. Tessa and Greta, dressed in dark clothing and carrying what looked like a large duffel bag. They were breaking into my house. I activated the recording system and grabbed my phone, quickly sending a text to Raj. "They're here, starting the live stream now." For the past month, I'd been expecting something like this. Tessa had been growing increasingly desperate since losing custody of Anna and Milo. Her supervised visitation sessions were awkward affairs where the kids barely tolerated her presence, and baby Harold's medical issues were mounting bills she couldn't afford on her reduced income. Greta had been even worse. The social humiliation of the court case had destroyed her carefully cultivated reputation, and her antique shop was failing as former customers avoided her. She'd been making increasingly unhinged phone calls about getting justice and making me pay for destroying her family. I'd been ready for them. The live stream went active on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube simultaneously, broadcasting to my friends list and the public groups that had been following the Harlan family drama. Within minutes, I had over 100 viewers watching as my ex-wife and former mother-in-law attempted to break into my home. I could hear them at the back door, fumbling with what sounded like lockpicks. They were trying to be quiet, but the storm was providing excellent cover for their amateur burglary attempt. My phone buzzed with comments from the live stream. "OMG, is this happening live? Call the police. This is insane. Recording everything for evidence." I waited until they were actually inside the house before making my move. They'd entered through the kitchen, and I could hear them whispering as they moved through the first floor. The duffel bag contained what looked like planted evidence, probably pills or stolen goods they planned to discover and report to the police. It was a pathetic plan, but it might have worked if they hadn't chosen to execute it during a live stream. I came down the stairs slowly, making sure the camera caught everything. Tessa and Greta were in my living room, pulling items out of their bag and placing them around the room. In the camera's infrared mode, I could see pill paraphernalia, what looked like stolen electronics, and several manila envelopes that probably contained forged documents. "Good evening, ladies," I said, turning on the lights. They spun around like deer caught in headlights. Tessa dropped a bag of white powder, and Greta clutched a laptop that definitely wasn't mine. "Nick," Tessa's voice was high and panicked. "We were just breaking into my house to plant evidence," I finished. "Yes, I can see that. So can about 300 other people who are watching this live." I held up my phone, showing them the live stream with its rapidly climbing viewer count. "You're recording this?" Greta's face went white. "I'm broadcasting this live to the internet. Say hello to your audience, Greta." The comment section was exploding. "Call 911 now. This is evidence of breaking and entering. Screenshot everything. These women are insane. You can't do this," Tessa said, but her voice lacked conviction. "This is illegal surveillance. Actually, it's legal surveillance of people who broke into my house. There's a difference." I walked closer to them, making sure the camera captured the planted evidence clearly. "So what's the plan here? You break in, plant pills and stolen goods, then call the police and claim I'm a criminal? Try to get custody of Anna and Milo back by framing me?" "We weren't," Greta started. "You weren't what? You weren't breaking into my house? You weren't carrying a bag full of evidence to plant? You weren't trying to destroy my life the same way you destroyed your own?" The viewer count had passed 500, and the comments were coming too fast to read. I could see that several people were recording the stream, ensuring that even if something happened to my broadcast, the evidence would survive. "Mom, we need to leave," Tessa whispered urgently. "Now!" But Greta was beyond rational thought. The stress of the past months, the social humiliation, the financial pressure, and now the realization that their desperate plan was being broadcast live to hundreds of people had pushed her over the edge. "This is all your fault," She screamed at me, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. You destroyed my family. You turned everyone against us. You made Teresa lose her children. I didn't make Teresa do anything, I replied calmly. Teresa chose to cheat on me. Teresa chose to have a baby with her dead stepfather. Teresa chose to lie to me for months. I just made sure people knew the truth. The truth! Greta's voice rose to a shriek. You want the truth? Fine. Yes, we used Harold's seed. Yes, I encouraged it. Harold was twice the man you'll ever be. His genes were superior. His bloodline was important. The livestream comments went wild. Did she just admit to genetic fraud? This woman is completely insane. Someone save this video. Evidence for the police. And yes, Greta continued, apparently unable to stop herself, we've been planning to get rid of you. We've been trying to find ways to prove you're unfit. We planted evidence tonight because you don't deserve those children. You don't deserve anything. Tessa was pulling on her mother's arm, trying to get her to stop talking, but Greta was in full confession mode. We hired Sean to seduce Teresa. We thought if she had an affair, she could divorce you and take everything. But you turned it around. You made us look like the criminals. Wait, I said, genuinely surprised. You hired Sean? Of course we hired him. You think a man like that would be interested in Teresa naturally? We paid him to seduce her, to give her confidence to leave you. This was news to me. I'd assumed Sean was just an opportunistic hunter, but apparently he'd been a paid actor in Greta's elaborate scheme to destroy my marriage. The revelation seemed to hit Tessa like a physical blow. She stared at her mother in horror. You paid him? You paid Sean to sleep with me? It was for the family. It was to get you away from this loser. You paid a man to pretend to love me while I was pregnant with Harold's baby. The absurdity of the situation would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. Tessa had been cheating on me with a man her mother had hired to seduce her, while carrying a child conceived with her stepfather's seed, all as part of a plan to frame me as an unfit parent. I can't. Tessa sat down heavily on my couch, her face in her hands. I can't do this anymore. But Greta wasn't finished. She turned back to me, her eyes wild with rage and desperation. You think you've won? You think you've destroyed us? We'll never stop. We'll keep fighting. We'll find a way to... She was interrupted by the sound of sirens outside. Several viewers had apparently called 911, and the police were responding to reports of a break-in in progress. Looks like the cavalry has arrived, I said, still recording. Ladies, you might want to think about how you want to explain this situation to the officers. The next few minutes were chaos. Police officers entered through the front door. I'd given them the code, and found two women in my living room surrounded by planted evidence, while I live-streamed the entire encounter to an audience that had grown to over 1,000 viewers. The officers were professional but clearly confused by the situation. It's not every day you respond to a burglary call and find the homeowner calmly narrating events to a live internet audience, while the perpetrators confess to multiple crimes on camera. Sir, can you explain what's happening here? Officer Martinez asked. Certainly. These are my ex-wife and former mother-in-law. They broke into my house tonight to plant evidence as part of an attempt to frame me for various crimes. The entire incident has been live-streamed and recorded. They've also confessed to fraud, conspiracy, and hiring someone to commit infidelity. Officer Martinez looked at the camera, then at the planted evidence, then at Tessa and Greta. Ma'am, he said to Greta, is this accurate? Greta opened her mouth, probably to deny everything, but then seemed to realize that thousands of people had just watched her confess to multiple felonies on live video. I want a lawyer, she said quietly. That's probably a good idea, Officer Martinez agreed. As they were being arrested, Anna appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd been staying at her friend's house for the evening, but apparently someone had called her about the live stream. Dad, what's happening? Your mother and grandmother just got arrested for breaking into our house, I said. But don't worry, everything's fine now. Anna looked at Tessa, who was being handcuffed in our living room, while 1,000 strangers watched online. Mom, Anna said quietly, why did you do all this? Tessa looked up at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, I thought she might try to explain, might try to justify her actions or blame someone else. Instead, she just said, I'm sorry, Anna, I'm so sorry. It was the first honest thing she'd said in months. As the police led them away, I ended the live stream with a simple message. Justice has been served. Thank you all for witnessing the truth. The video went viral within hours. News outlets picked up the story, social media exploded with commentary, and the Harlan family saga became a cautionary tale about the dangers of deception, manipulation, and genetic fraud. Sean Porter, watching from whatever hole he'd crawled into, probably realized that his situation had just gotten much worse. The revelation that he'd been paid to seduce Tessa added a new dimension to his humiliation and potentially exposed him to criminal charges for fraud and conspiracy. 3 days later, I was cleaning up my office when Milo knocked on the door. "Dad, are Mom and Grandma Greta going to jail?" I sat down and pulled him onto my lap. "Probably, buddy. They did some very bad things, and there are consequences for bad choices. Are you sad about it?" I thought about that question for a moment. Was I sad, angry, relieved, vindicated? "I'm sad that it came to this," I said finally. "But I'm not sad that the truth came out. And I'm not sad that you and Anna are safe now." Milo nodded solemnly. "Anna says Mom was sick in her brain. Anna might be right about that. Will baby Harold be okay?" That was the question that kept me awake at night. Harold Jr. was an innocent sufferer in all this, a child who would grow up knowing that his existence was the result of one of the most disturbing family planning decisions in modern history. He would need medical care, therapy, and probably a new identity to escape the notoriety of his conception. I don't know, buddy, but I hope so. 2 weeks later, the legal proceedings began. Tessa and Greta were facing charges of breaking and entering, attempted fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes related to their various schemes. Sean Porter was arrested on charges of fraud and conspiracy after the revelation that he'd been paid to seduce Tessa. The media attention was intense but brief. The story had all the elements of a perfect scandal: sex, betrayal, genetic manipulation, and a spectacular public downfall. But eventually, newer outrages captured the public's attention. I used the settlement money from Tessa's insurance policies to set up college funds for Anna and Milo, and a medical trust for baby Harold. It wasn't much, but it was something. On a quiet Sunday morning in December, I was making pancakes for the kids when Anna came into the kitchen with her phone. "Dad, look at this." She showed me a news article about Greta's sentencing. 5 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy, and breaking and entering. The judge had been particularly harsh in her comments about Greta's manipulation of family relationships for personal gain and her complete lack of remorse for the damage caused to innocent children. Tessa had received 3 years, with the possibility of parole in 18 months if she completed psychological counseling and maintained regular visitation with baby Harold. Sean Porter got 2 years and a permanent restraining order, preventing him from contacting any member of our family. "Is it over now?" Anna asked. I looked out the window at our quiet suburban street where neighbors were walking their dogs and kids were riding bicycles, normal life, continuing as if the Harlan family drama had never happened. "Yeah," I said, "it's over." Anna smiled and went back to her phone, probably texting her friends about the latest developments. Milo was in the living room, building something elaborate with his Legos. Baby Harold was presumably somewhere across town, being cared for by whatever relative or foster family had taken him in. And I was making pancakes in my kitchen, in my house, with my kids, living the quiet life that Tessa and Greta had tried so hard to destroy. Sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving. Sometimes it's building something better from the wreckage of what came before. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's watching your enemies destroy themselves while the whole world watches. I flipped a pancake and smiled. It was going to be a good day.